In this last session, I want to talk about harmonizing content and code. Now, before we get started, it's not going to be heavily developer focused, you'll be glad to know. I just want to take a look at some of the features we've released over the last year and how we can use them together, particularly around developing landing pages. But I also want to touch on some of the stuff that we've talked about today, content first approach to building websites, getting organizational buy-in, and how we can use content in the future outside of web pages. So just set my timer. I'm also breaking all the rules of my presentations. I'm going to do a live demo today. I normally pre-record them. So I'm connected via hotspot, so hopefully the internet connection was saturated earlier, so everything was running a bit slow. So here we go, harmonizing content and code. Who's heard of design systems? Not many. Not many of you at Rocket in 2014. Design systems are a big talking point in the industry at the moment, in the web industry, particularly around large websites that just span many pages. So they're defined as a set of connected patterns and shared practices coherently organized to serve the purpose of a digital product. That comes from Ayla Kolmatova. She's recently written a new book called Design Systems, a practical guide to creating design languages for digital products. I'm about 2/3 of the way into it. It's a really good book. I've been looking at design systems for the last couple of years, and the power to have a design system in your organization can make delivering digital products faster, websites faster, applications faster. And an example of that is, this is Airbnb. All heard of Airbnb? Okay. Well, Airbnb have got a design language system that they've developed. This is just a small snapshot of it, on all the different components that make up their iOS app. These components don't just work on iOS, they work on Android, they work on web as well. They adapt and change. So they're defining a language of how certain content should be displayed in those use cases. Atlassian, a product that we use Jira, Bamboo, Bitbucket, the lot, Confluence. Atlassian have recently done a big design overhaul to their applications and to their website. And Atlassian.design is their website of bringing together their design system, their voice and tone guide, their brand style guidelines. They're bringing all those things together. Material design by Google, a way of designing applications and websites using common patterns and look and feel. If you use any of the Google applications, you'll notice recently they just launched a new version of Google Calendar and so on and so forth. It's all based on material design. Salesforce, CRM, they use this lightning design system. Again, touches on components, accessibility, all sorts, iconography. And there are many design systems out there. This GitHub repo lists a couple of hundred design systems, whether they support, they've got voice and tone guides in there, designers toolkits, like storyboarding through their products. Anyone heard of Atomic Design by Brad Frost? Yeah. So the whole theory of design systems and developing patterns and small components in your websites and applications stemmed really from Brad Frost's work. Probably 2013 he started this work. He's recently launched a book. You can actually read it online for free, atomicdesign.bradfrost.com. You can order a PDF, an ebook version and a paperback version as well. He's done some really interesting work over the last couple of years. He's developed a system called Pattern Lab, which allows you to bring together all your organization's components and patterns in code and actually see how they work together. It's good for testing and prototyping. So again, I just want to highlight that design systems are out there and they're really important for beginning to build digital products easily. And from a couple of years ago. It touches on responsive web design, touches on the way that we're moving away from Photoshop to using the browser, and again defining those patterns and how we've used defining patterns and components inside the product, so check that out as well. Some of the stuff is less relevant than the information that's available today, but there's some good principles in there as well. I want us to think of this term. I think in the enterprise web content management and large enterprises, we consider every large website as a complex adaptive system. We often want to do redesigns, and redesigns take a long time. Things change, people want to add new things, take things away, change the color scheme, change the layout, change these templates, introduce this area, take away that area. They're constantly adapting and evolving. And if they're not, they're probably going stale and being ineffective. But how many pages does your site have? 100? 100,000? Somewhere in between? There's a lot of content out there. How that content is displayed and curated varies. We have quite static content, things along the lines of terms and conditions, privacy policies, accessibility notices, stuff that probably doesn't really ever get much love but just stays there. It's just static content. We have pages of dynamic content, landing pages, home pages, things that where little aspects, granular pieces of content get drawn in from other content around your site. Your content is interconnected. It's built together from many parts. And it starts off a journey from a small granular piece up to a more larger piece of content. So a blog post, a news article, a service that you offer, a university course that you might be offering. Then there's this sense of curated content. Content that's usually got a very specific purpose, a very specific audience, and it's usually curated together, like, I don't know, marketing pages for a product, university open day, and encouraging a white paper download or a research paper download, carrying out a specific survey, drawing together some key content that's generally used for one use. The user group events page today really had the kind of venue, the schedule. That's curated content. We've usually got a level of measuring these pages as well. What's the effectiveness of them? How many forms are being submitted? How much of that content is actually being read and consumed? Because it really matters to us if we're putting on an event. So curated content. We've also got personalized content. If any of you are using Popular or any method of creating personalized content, so you've got content that changes, not necessarily just based on language, but based on user visits, based on information, explicit data that you've captured previously from a user. Content that adapts and changes to what your visitor is looking for. And then you've got multilingual content, content that exists in multiple languages, managed content that exists in multiple languages, goes through a workflow process, goes through a translation process. Content is fundamental to your website offering. And as Gabriel was saying this morning, it's the start. It's the start of a website project. Not all of it, but it's the most important. And then we've got this sense of dispersed content, content that doesn't just sit on your website, content that ends up in different locations, content that may end up on social media, in another application, in a different type of news feed. Or it might be content that is curated and brought together through a new application that you're building, a new facility that, like, pushing it to a screen in your like digital signage and such like that. Content exists in multiple places, doesn't just exist on the web. When you're creating your content, the web isn't necessarily the only destination or the expectation of where you expect that content to be. So every large website is a complex, adaptive system. Content is fundamental. That's why at Zengenti we're really focusing on creating better content. We want to provide you the tools to model and shape that content really well. Not just so your nice redesign goes ahead this year, but that your content's ready for the future. That it's not siloed into a page, that it isn't just kept there and deleted a year later when you do your next redesign or your next change. It's hard. I've heard conversations say modeling content, creating content in this way, creating websites in this way is hard. But there's a cost. We're all expected to make efficiency savings and show the value of our websites. But actually, do we see the value if we revamp it a few years later and we don't address the real issue, which is your content? So we provided the ability to define new types of contents this year, defining it using content types. This is the content type builder, and I'll drop into the content type builder shortly. But this allows you to define that content to make those reusable chunks available. Through that builder, you can create relationships from one content type to another. So whether you've got a book or a movie that might have an author or it might have a cast member, those are those interconnections of two different pieces of content that might be used in different ways, but they're interlinked. Courses, a campus that it might exist on. You might have a set of events that are carried out across multiple venues. Well, venues are a content type in themselves. These are just small pieces of modelling that you might use. It might just be the venue name and the location for today. The next month it might be, oh, we need to now start supporting images for a venue elsewhere on our site. Well, then you can add a new field to your content type. We provide you a rich set of tools to restrict what content goes into those fields. So validation, so whether something's required by your authors. Whether we offer a sense of pattern matching to make sure the content meets that criteria. So make sure a URL has got HTTP in it, for example, or a www. Or whether the character count of that field meets your organisation's content guidelines. The BBC use multiple headlines across their mobile apps and their websites. So for their key website, they'll have a longer title compared to what's displayed on their mobile site. They have a short title. So they can use these character count, you can use these character count fields to reduce that. So, and that's all part of that content strategy, understanding how that content is going to be displayed as well. And that fits into your design system that I started out at the beginning. If you've got that design system, you know that content will be displayed in a certain way in certain devices, and you might have to choose different fields to represent that content. And we provide things like content guidelines, little snippets of text to aid the user when they're populating their content, to say, do you know what, we want to avoid jargon words in here, such as ABC. You might want to just touch on the tone and voice of how this content should be written. We provide composer fields. Some of you in the content types discussion earlier on in the kitchen area talked about content types, enabling you to structure maybe an article or a blog post to really separate that content from the text to the images to the quotes to maybe the social media embeds that you use in that page. Because some platforms at a later date will not want embedded information in. Google News and Apple News restrict certain types of content that can be rendered in their application. If you've got that content structured in a way that it's all bundled together, it's very difficult to remove that stuff for those distribution channels where that content might exist. So beginning to separate that content, see it as a whole, but seeing it separated aids in that process for future publishing. So one of the features I talked about was components that was released in Componentise 10. Now components are groups of fields that you can use in your content types. So we've seen some examples of fields, text, images, so on and so forth. But as we look through the different content types that you guys have been creating, we've noticed that there are new field types that need to be defined, content that we haven't really thought of or may not everyone might use. So components allow you to group unique chunks of content together that do not make sense on their own. So a few examples of this. You might have a course module within a course content type that might contain modular name, modular description, length of module, so on and so forth. That could be a simple component. A video banner on your homepage might contain the video that's been used, the title text, maybe a subtitle in some cases where it's used, maybe a call to action. Addresses, like you might have a content type with a list of venues and addresses, but you might have an area on a site that says, okay, add the following 3 addresses that this event could be held in, and they might need to be manually typed in, might not be related to your core organizational content. So you can define address fields. Like we've used it for opening hours for a demo the other week, the sense of being able to select days that a venue is open on and defining a to and from date. So these are just some examples. So components look the same as other fields. They've got the same input look and feel. So you can see in this example, when you start maybe looking at page content with content types and entries, you could start defining an SEO component. The SEO component, title, description, maybe the canonical URL for where the master content exists on your site for good SEO. But this could also be extended. Like, how does that page look on Facebook? How does that content get represented on Twitter, in Twitter cards, in Twitter summary cards? So you could extend this component to support Twitter card type with a drop-down. Is it summary or is it summary with a large image? Add an image support in here, so the image that you place in that piece of content is what the image that will be represented in Facebook or in that Twitter card. Components are repeatable. This is a new feature coming in 10.1, the ability to repeat those fields. So remember earlier on today, we kind of said can have between 3 and 6 uses of this field. So I don't know, a simple feature area where you might highlight a number of features. You can say, okay, I want a maximum of 4 features in this landing page or in this page area. And you get the little add button that we saw. So components are centrally managed like content types. They have a similar listing screen that you're used to. And by having them centrally managed, you can use them in multiple content types, making them reusable. So need to change the SEO information in one component, edit the component, it updates across all content types. Next time your content author comes in, they see a new field to populate and let them know to populate that. So what does this look like in practice? Firstly, I think it's helpful if you haven't got a design system, which seems a number of you haven't necessarily heard of them, might start recognizing some of the patterns that we might look at. So the first thing to do is an interface inventory, and it comes back to Brad Frost's blog post on coming up with this term interface inventory. And it's the idea of going through your site, going through your pages, going through your site, and understanding all the different components that your site might have. This example is of a bank that Brad Frost was working with. And they had all these different button styles. They had this design inconsistency across your site. How many of you can probably find examples on your site where there are real inconsistencies? This affects the user experience. This affects testing. This affects accessibility. There's a cost to developing each of those components that's on your site. What if you make a change to one? What happens to the others? Do you know where they all are? It can be really disparate and spread across your site and can be quite messy. So coming back to having a design system that defines these things. What do buttons look like? What do feature areas look like? What do summary and titles look like? What's your typography? Is that consistent in every area of your site? So I want us to look at the Zengenti homepage just as a really simple example of how you could componentize this site and use content types and entries to create these types of landing pages. So if we were to take an interface inventory of the Zengenti.com site, you've got things like the video banner, which I'm slightly cutting off at the bottom corner. So we've got a video banner. We might have a logo block that exists across the page. We've got feature areas. So this feature block, design and build, consensus cloud. We've got this sort of hero block, a background image with some overlaying text, a title, description, and a call to action. And we've got this summary that's at the bottom of the page. Happens to be text that's centered, but in your design language, you might have this left aligned and right aligned. It's a component that's got different ways of representing that data. So for those of you who are not on Consensus 10 or 9 and above, let's take a look at content types and entries and how we can use it when it swipes across. Let's see if my Hotspot is stayed alive. It has. So if you're not used to using content types and entries in the CMS from the dashboard now, in the left-hand panel now you see this new content types and entries button. This is at the moment controlled with admin groups, so if you don't want somebody to access content types, entries, components or API keys, there's separate groups to manage who can manage that content. At the moment we don't have any content types defined, so this is the empty content type screen. Hopefully all will go well. I don't do live demos. So create a new content type. I'm just going to call this one landing page. And this could be a generic landing page that might exist in multiple site areas. I'm going to create that page. So now we're into the content type builder. And it's at this point we get to start adding fields about what's going to exist in this content type. So every page has a title. We actually need a title. We need a title to identify it in the user interface and linking to different content. On the right-hand side, we've got this panel that allows you to specify your validation and the different editors that are represented. So a text field could actually have a single-line text field or a multi-line text field. I mentioned content guidelines here. You could populate the text there. Placeholder text that you want to exist to give people a little hint towards what they need to write in that box. And some standard field settings. Field ID will be used by your developers to actually get hold of the title from that content type. So we've got text field. Maybe we've got, if we look back to the landing page, we've got the page title. But then we've got this video banner. Now, what we could do is we could say, I'm going to add another text field for the text that exists at the top of the site, which was create better content. So I could do this. I could do banner title, and then I could put a banner link in. So I go to text, maybe the link that it's going to go to, banner link. Within the validation, I can look at my own screen. Matches the pattern that it's a website address. I want it to make sure there's a website address in there. And then it uses what's known as a regular expression to check that. So yeah, we've got a landing page, we've got a banner title, banner link. We might want a video right down the bottom here. This screen's weird with a curve. We could either add an asset to link to a particular image and to a video file. Or if we've got a YouTube URL, we could probably just check another text field to say banner video link. And again, just quickly, matches pattern is a website address. You could create a regular expression that specifically looks for a set YouTube URL. In this case, I'm not going to bother because I don't write regular expressions. If I hit publish, we should update that list to have it. So that's one way that we could achieve that banner title, that banner video, and a banner link. Might actually want to put an image in as well as its fallback. So go to image, go to settings, and just say banner. So if I go back over to this panel now and I go to entries, you can see I haven't got any content in here yet. So if I go to new entry, now I get the option to create a new landing page entry. So entries essentially, it's not a page, it's your content entity. So the title is homepage maybe. And then the banner title could be create better content. And I could put the link in there and so on and so forth. The trouble is, all these fields are really disconnected and they don't really make sense to separate that content like this. A developer would have to say, go to this content type, find me the banner title, find me the banner link, find me the banner embed, in order to use that content to develop a component that would render that video banner. So this is where components comes in, and we can create a couple of components. So if we go to the components panel, yeah, I know, don't care. Go to components, and I'm going to create this component in here, and I'm going to call it my video banner, because I don't just want to use it in this landing page, I might want to use it in another area of my site. So create the video banner. And I can put those same fields in. So I'm just going to put a couple of text fields in. So title, subtitle, call to action text, call to action link maybe, a fallback image if the video won't play, and a video link. So let's just move this one up. And these are really quick and easy to make, the same as your content types. So title, subtitle. Your video banner might not always have a subtitle, but you might in some instances. Call to action text. So this might be what's rendered in a button. Go and view our latest demo. Call to action link. Can't remember what I was going to put in there. Subtitle link, oh, video link. Video link. It's another reason I don't do live demos. And then image could be a fallback image. Let's put that back. So that's cool. I've defined my video banner now. So that's published. Head back over to my content type. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace those fields I was using for that banner control and now use this component. So let's just take this out. Yes, I do want to delete it. So if you go down to components now, you can insert a component. And you can see I've got the video banner component. And now when I save and publish, and I go and create an entry. Now here's my video banner that I could use in any content type that's reusable across my site. So we've defined our content types. We've defined a set of components. Those components produce a simple form for our editors to populate. They can easily add their content. They've got those guidelines in place and those validations in place. And what that actually does for our developers is produces this really nice bit of code. It's known as JSON. It's just what the API is returning to actually real clarity of actually what's in that field. So we've got a title. I didn't actually put a subtitle in, so the developer gets a result that's null. The call to action and the video URL. So all they're getting back is really clean data. They're not getting any visual presentation of what that content looks like. That's a rendering concern. That's a concern for what that content might end up in. So from this now, what you want to be able to do is create a component that adapts to the different content that's provided to it. So the feature area that we saw on the Zengenti homepage, we had those 3 blocks. Well, we might only have one feature that we want to talk about. So we could just assign one feature and populate one feature at the time. But you know what? Next week, we want to add another feature. Do we want someone to come in and create a new subtemplate and drag a new subtemplate in, or do you just want them to write the content? That's the most important bit. So they write the second feature in a repeated component, and the second one is displayed on the home page. Oh, they got a third one? Oh, the third one's now displayed. Because the developer has created a coded component that receives the data and adapts and changes to its input, making it really, really flexible. So what's this do? It brings consistency. Coming back to the design system, if you've defined your feature areas and how they work in different scenarios, if you've used these feature areas everywhere else on your site, your developer's just got to update one piece of code, one coded component. It still takes the same input. But in the example I gave earlier on, I might not have initially set the subtitle for the video component. But I add it now, and a developer's now got access to text that is the subtitle that he can just add and bring support to that component. Not changing a load of subtemplates, not expecting the site to be republished wherever that template is. It updates with it. So we don't end up with this. We end up with a consistent design language, consistent components that can render different amounts of content, makes it simpler to test, allows you to bring better accessibility improvements, noticed an error. oh, that error's on multiple site areas. I can now update it in one place. No site, that accessibility issue is fixed across the whole site. And in the future, with the web publishing platform, we're proposing a way of delivering these components in a really structured way, in a way that you can say, do you know what, I've got this new version of my component, but I want to test it with 50% of the site visitors that come in. You could do that. If you wanted to write that component in a new language, you could switch over to using that new component. And so we can monitor the performance of it. You could do this today with something like Pattern Lab that Brad Frost outlined in his work, and start testing the speed of those components just in a browser as well. So you can test these things in isolation with real content. What is it really like for the end user to see that component on the page? So with a design system in place, content separated into its different concerns and easily editable by your authors, and components that are developed in code that can be easily reused throughout your site, you offer some really great opportunities. Now, I'm going to just show you a few examples from Airbnb again. Been talking to the guys in the car on the way over this morning. They've been employing what they call design technologists. The idea is that they basically work amongst the design team with their design language and do some really clever stuff with code and bits and pieces to develop some really cool tools that aids that sort of development process. And they couldn't do it without a design system in place and their content being defined. So Airbnb has this sense of painting with code. As I said earlier on, all their components are written in React Native. So it works on iOS and Android, so one code base across two platforms. And they actually use React on the web as well. And you can do cool things like this. So Sketch is a UI sort of development application. So you've got they've created a plugin for Sketch called React Sketch, funnily enough. And you can actually write the React code. And they're actually querying Foursquare at the moment to go and get me all the coffee shops in San Francisco or all the parks in San Francisco, and they're seeing their design updating with real data. It doesn't have to be Foursquare's API, that could be the delivery API to go and get your data for your content. You're thinking about doing a new redesign but not sure what it's going to work like with real content. Well, Gabriel said this morning about like if you start developing that content and understanding that content, that your developers and designers can actually start mocking out real content in their new designs. You can do some early usability testing without the need of developing an entire site and then realizing that you've made a mistake. They've done it to demonstrate sort of different layouts across different devices. So again, this is React code specifying different iPhone versions and that code adapting to those different scenarios. Another quick example, this is just a very simple piece of UI, and what they're doing is testing out translation. So actually, how does our content work across in different languages in this component? Well, they use Google Translate, start saying I want it in French, German, Spanish, Swedish and Finnish, and Google Translate takes those words, translates them, pushes them back into that UI component to test them. So you've got internationalization testing from real content in components. And I think the most exciting one is this last video. This last video, what's that? What do people recognize that as? Anybody know? An image. So often when we're talking about things in our UI and our product, we start drawing on a whiteboard or we start drawing on pieces of paper. Oh, we want the UI to do this. This is a button. This is an image. This is some text. So take a look at this video. Now there is audio which you're not going to hear, so I'll summarize. Well, we've got an image, and then we might have this sense of maybe a headline and some text underneath. But actually, what Airbnb are doing is starting to look at all the different components that they might have in their system, and they're starting to sort of define these very quick sketches. And they're doing a bit of an interface inventory, and they're sort of defining each of those kind of components. But the really exciting bit is this next bit. So they've got these sketches, they've got these symbols. But what they want to do now is, who actually really wants to be writing code all the time? Who wants to be spending their budget on lots of coded components? Well, you don't really. Well, that's my time. I've got 5 minutes left. So this is a webcam, and they're starting to use machine learning. So you've got a web browser, a bit of a terminal that's doing some detection. Over here, you've got 2 versions. You've got the view from the webcam, a highlighted view, and a contrasted view. And he's beginning to put sketches of common components underneath the webcam. And what's actually happening here is it's real code being generated in the web browser from those conversational pieces of UI drawings. So using machine learning to detect a drawing and write out your code. What if you could mock up a landing page or mock up a piece of content to talk to your users about? If you've defined your components right and you've defined your content right, this becomes realistic. And this is about preparing content for the future, because you don't know what it's going to be used for. You don't know how that content's going to be consumed in 2 years' time. What new technologies might come out that you want to suddenly display your content on in the car dash, like on your phone, on your watch, on a set of Google glasses or whatever they might be. You don't know where that content's going to end up, so why silo it in the first place? So, in summary, work towards establishing a design system. Buy a book, read up on it. This is the way things are going. Keep abreast with what's there. Focus on your content. Content first. Define common reusable components. Get a language that you can use together with developers, your stakeholders, and talk about the same things. Don't necessarily talk about a banner if you don't all call it a banner. Don't start calling it a feature area if you call it an editorial marquee like Airbnb do. Have a common design language that you can use in your organization. Yeah, the process does take time. But it takes time once, not multiple times, not multiple redesign, not multiple projects. Got a design system you can use on your website, you might be able to use it on your organizational intranet as well. Like, might not make sense to, but actually if you've got these common patterns defined that are reusable, actually the speed of delivering some of these projects becomes easier. It does take time, but it establishes a foundation for the future. Thank you.